Hey, welcome into the next chapter. This one is going to be short and sweet, and it talks about the usage of your rooks. Here we've got only two middle game principles relevant to the proper play of your rooks. And the first one may seem simple, but in reality it's so important. The concept is very simple. It says bring your rooks into play, and it's one of the most common errors that lots and lots of amateur players are playing beginner to intermediate level players. Now let's take a look at the chessboard, and I'm showing you what I'm talking about. Alright, so here we've got a relatively standard position right after an opening. It is black to move. Now how would you play here as black? Let me give you a couple of seconds to think about it. There are a number of options here, but here is the first rule in regards to your rooks. You gotta connect your rooks. So in an opening, after you moved your minor pieces out, you castled, the next thing you gotta do is to connect your rooks, meaning you need to move your queen away. For example, in this position, black could easily move their queen, for instance over here, and now the rooks are connected, meaning that they are supporting each other, they are looking at each other. And from the vast practice, it's been concluded that this is a good situation for the rooks. The rooks are in great harmony when they are connected, and also an additional benefit of this is that now you can easily move your rooks into play to one of the central files. Both rooks can be moved there, and the queen is not standing on the way of the rooks. So that's basically the move that I want you to consider first of all in positions like that. Now let's take this move back and let's think what happens usually instead. So instead, a player thinks that, okay, the opening is finished, I've finished my development, now it's the middle game, I gotta think how to attack, how can I advance forward, what can I do now? And they start planning their middle game activities now and can kind of forget about the rooks, forget about the fact that the rooks are still not connected and not activated. So I'm going to show you what happened in this game. Black played pawn f5, trying to expand and do something in the center, maybe on the king side. White responded bishop c4, attacking this pawn. Black played queen e7. I'm not even commenting on every move. You can just notice the general pattern that throughout a series of the next moves, the black's both rooks were never used. They never took part into this game. And even though we're not talking about a game of beginners, we're talking about the game of two players rated approximately 2150, and this is a FIDE rating, meaning that these are expert level players. They are not beginners. But you can notice how black never uses their rooks. Now white traded here, then played knight d4, attacking something in the center. Black decided to play d5, attacking the bishop. Then they traded here in the center, played b5. Again, decent move, blockading the bishop out, but rook e1, queen f7. So they keep playing, and the black's moves aren't bad. That's another interesting point that I want to highlight. They always pursue some idea, they make sense, but they just kind of forget about the rooks a little bit. At this point, black played pawn h5. Again, I can see the point of the move. Black was concerned that because of this pin, why the knight cannot move, and maybe white is going to play pawn g4, and maybe even then pawn g5. So black played pawn h5 to stop that from happening. So again, the move makes sense. So again, we're not talking about a beginner player, but for all these moves, black is not using their rooks. So it's kind of like they're playing old chess, that situation where a master level player plays against a much weaker opponent. Sometimes they would give a rook away at the beginning of the game, or even a queen away, just to equalize chances, because the players are of two different levels. So it's kind of like when you don't bring your rooks into play, it's kind of like you're playing odds chess. You're giving the rook away to your opponent, saying that, hey, I'm so much stronger, I'm gonna beat you without my rooks. Right? But you don't want to play like that. I'm just kidding here. So you do want to move your rooks into play. So the first task right after an opening is to connect rooks, meaning that they will look at one rook is looking on the other rook, and after that the next task is to bring them into play, meaning to move them usually to the central files or to open files to activate them. For instance, in this position, black could easily move this rook to here to c8 so that it attacks the queen and the rook stands on a semi-open file. Or the other rook could easily go to the g file, so that it would also block white from moving their pawn to g4, but it will also be active along this file. So black easily could move one of their rooks to more active squares, or even both of them, and bring them into play, but instead they played pawn h5 still. And now I played rook e3, attacking the pawn. Black played queen a7. Again, an interesting move, puts the pin on the rook, threatens d4, I get it. But now, after queen e5, finally black played rook a to e8, and notice that it is the 29th move of the game. So almost for 30 moves, black pretty much never use their rooks into this game. So it's such a common mistake that happens even for relatively advanced players that I really wanted to highlight it here so that you never play this mistake yourself. Now let's come back once again to the very beginning of the game, and I'll show you once again what you should think about. Once again, let's come back to the starting position of this example. Here's how you should think in this and similar positions, because, it's not about this game. It's just a very standard position right after an opening. Therefore, you will definitely face similar positions multiple times, almost all the time, in your own chess games. So the first thing black needs to care about is to connect the rooks, meaning they need to bring their queen out. It's too early yet to think about the middle game plan, really, because still your heavy pieces are not involved into the game. Black developed minor pieces, great, castled, almost fine, but now it's time to use your heavy pieces and to also activate them, to develop them. So the first thing to do is to play queen e7, and the next moves that you should be thinking about is how to bring my rooks to more active positions, usually to one of the central files. So for instance, the queenside rook could easily be moved somewhere here to the C file, because it's a semi-open file, because it's going to be active there. And as for the kingside rook, it's slightly harder indeed. There aren't many good options for the rook right now, but anyway, usually you need to move it to either e8 or d8 to one of the central squares to get it involved into the game somehow. And after that, once all of your heavy pieces are developed, then you can actually say that, yeah, now my development is complete. I developed my minor pieces, I developed my heavy pieces, I castled, now I did everything, and now it's time for the middle game planning. Now I'll show you another game, this time from Grandmasters, and we'll see how they did it in their own game. Alright, now we've got another game. This time the white player is Skarijek or something like that, rated 2000, and black player is a Grandmaster. It's black to move here. Once again, think about this yourself for a second. How would you play here in this position? So we can see kind of the finishing stage of the opening. Seemingly time for black to come up with a middle game plan, but instead he made a much smarter thing. Instead of thinking how to attack here, he realized that his rooks are still not connected. The rooks aren't connected, so he just moved bishop d7, and he does not pursue any plan whatsoever. It just develops a bishop so that the rooks gets connected. White played rook e2. Now, is it time for black to attack now? Well, in some positions you may attack, but again, usually, very often, you need to bring the rooks into the center first. So black played rook d8, and now both of the rooks are involved, at least to some extent. This rook on e8 is particularly active, putting pressure onto the white center. White played rook to d2. Now black realized that even though this rook is indeed very active, the other one on d8 is kind of passive. The bishop of black stands on the way of a rook and it's not active. So black just played bishop to c8, just so that the rook has this potential open file. And now both rooks are quite active indeed. This rook is putting some pressure onto the white's pawn, that's great. The other one is less active, but at least it provides some support for this pawn on d6. Maybe in some potential distant future, black will be even to push d5 themselves and open up the file for their rook. Right now white is controlling it very well, but anyway, thanks to the rook standing on the center of the board, it can have some influence on the game. So far, black never thought about their middle game plan at all. They just wanting to bring their rooks into play, connect the rooks, and then bring them into play. Another good thing about this is that very often, while doing that, while activating your heavy pieces, your opponent will do something that will simplify your middle game planning, and you won't have to think about it at all. For instance, in this case, white played knight f5 here in this position, which made the black's task simpler. Now white is threatening to capture this pawn, so black pretty much has to exchange here on f5. Again, so black didn't even need to think about this move. It's just an exchange. And only now, black may start thinking, okay, what am I going to do now? And right now, also, it's not really about planning, because white is going to capture this pawn. Therefore, black needs to think either how to defend it or how to counterattack an opponent's pawn. Therefore, defending it, there aren't many good options. Maybe queen c7, but it looks very passive. So instead, he played queen b4 to counterattack this pawn on c4. White played bishop f1 to defend the pawn, but now black has a lot better option of how to defend the pawn. He can go knight e4, which not only defends the pawn over there on d6, but also attacks the rook. After an exchange on e4, black has this great knight, and after rook d4, black decided, since the knight is attacked, to move it here to c5, which would also double attack this pawn on a4. white decided to trade here on d6, and after that queen takes a4, and after the following exchange, now black attacked the pawn, b3, knight c5, and all of a sudden white resigned. It's not a sudden thing though, because there is no way for them to defend this pawn, and after that black will have a strong passed pawn on the a file, and white has nothing. So black could get away pretty much without any planning here throughout the entire game. They never needed to think about their plan. Initially, they just wanted to activate their rooks, and after that, they simply responded to a specific threat of white. They thought how to defend the pawn or how to attack a pawn. It was that simple. So here you can see how Grandmaster played seemingly simple looking moves, but they are simple when you understand this concept. And the concept once again states that you gotta bring your rooks into play. And especially in the early middle game stage, very often that's exactly what you should do before even thinking about any other plans.